People always say that the people who hurt you the most are strangers. But in my life, the deepest pain came from someone I loved more than anything. My name is Margaret, and I'm 72 years old. Most of my life has been quiet and simple. I worked as a school librarian for nearly 40 years, helping children discover stories that could take them anywhere in the world. Stories about courage, kindness, and family. Back then, my house was always full of laughter. My husband Robert would sit on the porch every evening with a cup of tea, and my son Daniel would run through the yard chasing our old golden retriever. Those were the days when life felt safe, but time has a way of changing everything. Robert passed away 8 years ago after a long illness. When he was gone, the house suddenly felt twice as big and twice as empty. The silence was the hardest part. Still, I tried to keep going. I watered the garden Robert had planted. I baked cookies on Sundays, and sometimes my son Daniel would visit. Daniel was all I had left. I loved him more than anything in this world. So when he showed up at my door one evening looking tired and worried, my heart broke for him. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm going through a rough time right now." He told me he had lost his job and couldn't keep up with his rent anymore. Before he even finished explaining, I already knew what I would say. "This is your home," I told him. "You can stay here as long as you need." Daniel hugged me tightly. For a moment, I felt like everything would be okay again, like having my son back in the house might bring life back into the quiet halls. And for a little while, it did. But what I didn't know then was that the person I trusted the most was about to do something that would change my life forever. For the first few weeks after Daniel moved back in, everything felt almost normal again. The house wasn't so quiet anymore. In the mornings, I could hear the coffee machine running in the kitchen before I even got out of bed. Sometimes Daniel would already be sitting at the table, scrolling through job listings on his laptop. "Morning, Mom," he'd say with a small smile. It reminded me of the days when he was younger, before life had gotten so complicated. He helped around the house too. He mowed the lawn, fixed the squeaky cabinet door in the kitchen, and even repaired the porch light Robert had always meant to replace. I remember thinking how proud Robert would have been to see him like that. But slowly, small things started to feel different. At first, it was little changes. Daniel spent more and more time on his phone, stepping outside to take calls. Whenever I asked who it was, he'd just shrug. "Just friends," he'd say quickly. Sometimes I would notice him watching me while I used my phone or my computer. Not in a strange way, just curious. One afternoon, while I was trying to pay one of my utility bills online, I couldn't remember my banking password. Daniel noticed me struggling and walked over. "Mom, let me help you," he said. I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't very comfortable with online banking, but Daniel had always been good with technology. So I handed him the phone. He helped reset my password and showed me how to log in again. "There you go," he said. "Now you can check your balance anytime." I thanked him, feeling relieved. At the time, it felt like a simple act of kindness, but looking back now, that moment would later become very important. A few days passed, and life continued as usual, until one morning when I decided to stop by the bank. I needed to withdraw some money for repairs in the garden. The fence in the backyard had been leaning for months. It seemed like a normal errand, just another quiet morning in my small town. But when the bank teller looked at her computer screen, her face suddenly changed. Her smile faded, and she looked at me in a way that made my heart start to race. "Mrs. Wilson," she said carefully, "there seems to be a problem with your account." When the bank teller said there was a problem with my account, I felt a strange knot form in my stomach. At first, I assumed it was just a small mistake. Maybe a payment hadn't gone through, or perhaps I had forgotten about a bill. "Is something wrong?" I asked gently. The young woman behind the counter looked uncomfortable. She glanced at her screen again before standing up. "Mrs. Wilson, would you mind waiting just a moment? I'd like the branch manager to speak with you." That was the moment my heart began beating faster. People don't usually call the bank manager over for small problems. A few minutes later, a tall man in a dark suit walked out of a glass office nearby. His name tag read Mr. Harris, branch manager. He greeted me politely, but I could see concern in his eyes. "Mrs. Wilson," he said kindly, "could you come with me for a moment?" He led me into his office and closed the door behind us. I sat down across from his desk, suddenly feeling nervous in a way I couldn't explain. He turned his computer screen toward me. "Mrs. Wilson," he said carefully, "did you recently authorize a transfer from your savings account?" I frowned. "No, I didn't." He clicked a few buttons and showed me the transaction history. 3 transfers, large ones. My eyes moved slowly over the numbers. $20,000, $30,000, and another transfer for nearly $50,000. Altogether, almost $100,000 had been moved out of my savings account. I felt the color drain from my face. That can't be right," I whispered. "That's my retirement money." The manager leaned forward. "These transactions were completed through your online banking account late last night," he explained. "And they were verified using your login credentials and security code." My hands began to tremble. I knew I hadn't done it. I barely even used online banking. For a moment, my mind raced through every possibility. Had someone hacked my account? Had the bank made a mistake? But then a memory slowly surfaced in my mind, a moment from just a few days earlier. The afternoon Daniel helped me reset my online banking password. I suddenly felt cold, because at that moment, a terrible thought crossed my mind. What if the person who took my money was someone living in my own house? I sat in the bank manager's office for several minutes, staring at the screen as if the numbers might somehow change if I looked long enough. But they didn't. The money was gone. Almost $100,000. The savings Robert and I had spent our entire lives building had disappeared overnight. Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Harris said gently, we will start an investigation immediately, but we need to know if anyone else has access to your online banking information. I hesitated. My mind kept replaying that moment in the kitchen a few days earlier. Daniel holding my phone. Daniel helping reset my password. Daniel showing me how to log in. I felt my chest tighten. No, I said quietly. No one should have access. But the truth was, I wasn't completely sure anymore. The manager printed out the transaction records and handed them to me. According to the system, the transfers had been made late at night, around 11:47 p.m. I tried to remember what I had been doing at that time. Then I realized something. That night, I had gone to bed early. I remembered hearing footsteps in the hallway sometime later, but I assumed Daniel had just gone to the kitchen for a snack. Suddenly, the memory felt different. He had been awake, and someone had logged into my bank account. I left the bank feeling dizzy. The drive home felt longer than usual, and the quiet streets of my neighborhood suddenly seemed unfamiliar. When I walked into the house, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He looked up and smiled. Hey, Mom, how was the bank? His voice sounded normal, too normal. I forced a small smile and placed my purse on the counter. It was fine, I said softly, but inside, my heart was pounding. I watched him carefully as he closed his laptop. For the first time in my life, I was looking at my own son and wondering something I never thought I would ask. Could Daniel really have done this to me? The rest of that afternoon felt heavy. Daniel moved around the kitchen like everything was normal, humming softly while he made himself a sandwich. The smell of toasted bread filled the room, and the sunlight coming through the window made the whole scene look peaceful. But inside me, nothing felt peaceful anymore. Every time I looked at him, the bank manager's words echoed in my mind. The transfers were made using your login credentials. I tried to push the thought away. Daniel was my son. I had raised him. I knew his heart, or at least I thought I did. Still, the question wouldn't leave my mind. That evening, we sat down for dinner like we always did. I had made vegetable soup and some fresh bread. Daniel ate quietly, scrolling through something on his phone between bites. Normally, we would talk about small things, the weather, the neighbors, or the job interviews he had been attending. But that night, the silence between us felt different. He eventually noticed me watching him. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked. I hesitated. My hands tightened slightly around my spoon. "There was something strange at the bank today," I said slowly. Daniel looked up. "Strange how?" I took a deep breath. "They said someone transferred a lot of money from my account last night. For a split second, something changed in his expression. It was quick, so quick that anyone else might have missed it. But I saw it, a flicker of surprise, or maybe worry. Then he leaned back in his chair. "That's weird," he said. "Maybe someone hacked your account." His answer came a little too quickly. I studied his face carefully. "Maybe," I said quietly, but inside, a terrible feeling was beginning to grow. Because the more I thought about it, the more one painful possibility kept returning to my mind. And I realized something that made my heart ache. There was only one person in the house that night who could have known my passwords. Only one person who had touched my phone. Only one person who had access to everything. My own son. And suddenly, I knew that sooner or later, I was going to have to ask him a question I never imagined asking in my life. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. The clock on my bedside table ticked slowly, each second feeling heavier than the last. My mind kept replaying the same thoughts again and again. What if Daniel really did it? Every time the thought appeared, I tried to push it away. No mother wants to believe something like that about her own child. But by morning, the question had become impossible to ignore. When I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was already there pouring himself a cup of coffee. Sunlight streamed through the window, lighting up the room just like every other morning. Except nothing felt the same anymore. "Morning, Mom," he said casually. His voice sounded normal, too normal. I sat down at the table and placed the bank papers in front of me. Daniel noticed them immediately. "What's that?" he asked. I looked at him carefully. "Daniel," I said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." He frowned slightly. "Okay," I slid the papers across the table. "These are the transfers from my account." He picked them up and scanned the numbers. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he shrugged. "Like I said yesterday, Mom, it's probably a hacker." I watched him closely. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you were the one who helped reset my banking password." His eyes lifted slowly. "And you were the only person in the house that night." The room suddenly felt very still. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel placed the papers back on the table, and something in his expression changed. The polite, worried look disappeared. In its place was a cold calmness I had never seen before. He leaned back in his chair and let out a small sigh. "You really want to know the truth?" he said. My heart pounded. "Yes," I whispered. Daniel looked straight at me, and then he said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my own son. "I did it." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The kitchen felt suddenly too quiet, like the entire house was holding its breath. "You did it," I repeated softly. Daniel didn't look ashamed. He didn't look nervous either. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, as if we were just discussing something ordinary, something that didn't carry the weight of betrayal. Yes, he said calmly. The word hit me harder than I expected. My hands trembled slightly on the table. Daniel, I whispered. That was my retirement money. He shrugged. You still have the house, he replied, and your pension. It's not like you're going to starve. The way he said it felt colder than the winter wind outside. I stared at him, trying to understand how the little boy I once held in my arms could be sitting in front of me speaking like this. Why? I asked. The question came out barely louder than a breath. Daniel sighed, as if the answer should have been obvious, because I needed it. He stood up and began pacing slowly around the kitchen. I've been trying to start my own business for months, Mom. Investors won't give me a chance. Banks won't approve a loan. But I knew you had money sitting in your savings account doing nothing. My chest tightened. That money wasn't doing nothing, I said quietly. It was for my future. Daniel stopped walking and looked at me. You're 72, he said bluntly. You've already lived your life. The words felt like a knife sliding slowly into my heart. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I trusted you, I said, my voice breaking slightly. But Daniel didn't seem to hear the pain in my voice. Instead, he picked up his car keys from the counter. Look, Mom, he said, I wasn't planning to hurt you. I'll pay it back someday when the business takes off. Then he walked toward the front door. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. And besides, he added with a faint smile, you can't prove anything. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and I sat there alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where my son had been sitting just moments earlier. But what Daniel didn't realize was that he had made one very big mistake, because the bank had already started their investigation, and soon the truth would catch up with him. After Daniel left the house, the silence returned. But this time, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the papers the bank manager had given me. The numbers blurred together as tears slowly filled my eyes. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. The boy I had raised, the child I had protected his entire life, had looked me in the eyes and admitted he had stolen from me. And worse than that, he believed he would get away with it. For a moment, I considered doing nothing. Many mothers would. Some part of me still wanted to protect him, even after everything he had done. But then I remembered something Robert used to say. Love doesn't mean letting someone destroy themselves. Daniel had crossed a line, and if I stayed silent, he would never learn that actions have consequences. So that afternoon, I returned to the bank. Mr. Harris was waiting for me in his office when I arrived. Mrs. Wilson, he said kindly, we've already started tracing the transactions. I took a deep breath. There's something you should know, I told him. Then I explained everything. How Daniel had helped reset my banking password, how he had access to my phone, and finally, how he had admitted taking the money. The manager listened carefully. When I finished speaking, He nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling us," he said. "This will help the investigation." Within hours, the bank's fraud department began working with the Financial Crimes Unit. They started tracing the destination of the transferred money, and the results came back faster than anyone expected. The money had been sent to a newly opened account, an account registered only 2 days before the transfers, and the name attached to that account was Daniel Wilson. But that wasn't the biggest mistake he had made, because when investigators looked deeper into the transfer logs, they discovered something even more important. Every online transaction leaves a digital fingerprint, an IP address, and the one used to move my money came directly from the internet connection inside my own house. Daniel thought he had planned everything perfectly, but he didn't realize something. The truth leaves traces behind, and those traces were about to lead straight back to him. 3 days passed after I spoke with the bank manager. During that time, Daniel barely came home. When he did, he acted as if nothing had happened. He walked through the house confidently, sometimes even humming, while he grabbed something from the fridge. It was as if the conversation we had in the kitchen had never happened. But I knew the truth. And now, so did the bank. Late one afternoon, I received a phone call from Mr. Harris. "Mrs. Wilson," he said calmly, "the investigation has confirmed where the money went." My heart beat faster. "It was transferred into an account under Daniel's name," he continued. Even though I already knew, hearing it confirmed still hurt. But the manager wasn't finished. The Financial Crimes Unit has also traced the login activity. The transfers were made from the internet connection registered to your home. There was a brief pause before he added quietly, "The police will be handling the matter from here." That evening, Daniel returned home again. He looked unusually cheerful. "I've got some good news," he said while tossing his keys on the counter. I didn't respond. Instead, I simply watched him. He poured himself a drink and sat down on the couch as if everything in the world was perfectly normal. But about 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the front door. A firm, official knock. Daniel looked up. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. "No," I said softly. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing on the porch. "Mrs. Wilson?" one of them asked politely. "Yes, we're here regarding a financial fraud investigation." Daniel had quietly walked into the hallway behind me. The officer's eyes shifted toward him. "Daniel Wilson?" he asked. Daniel froze. "Yes," he replied slowly. The officer stepped forward. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions about several unauthorized bank transfers." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the confidence disappear from Daniel's face, because at that moment, he finally realized something. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. It was a criminal investigation. The hallway felt smaller as the 2 police officers stepped inside. Daniel stood frozen near the couch, his confident smile completely gone. For the first time since all of this began, he looked nervous. "Sir," one of the officers said calmly, "we have evidence connecting you to unauthorized transfers from Mrs. Wilson's bank account." Daniel tried to laugh it off. "There must be some mistake," he said quickly. But the officer shook his head. "There's no mistake. The transfers were made from this house using your laptop. The account that received the money is registered in your name." Daniel's eyes shifted toward me. For a brief moment, something flashed across his face: anger, disbelief, maybe even betrayal. But I didn't look away. This time, I stayed silent. "Daniel Wilson," the officer continued, "you are being detained while we investigate charges of financial fraud and identity theft." The room went completely quiet. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, pacing back and forth for a moment. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Then he looked directly at me. "You called them?" he asked, his voice sharp. My heart ached, but I answered honestly. "No," I said softly. "The truth did." The officers asked Daniel to gather a few personal items before leaving with them. As he walked toward the door, he stopped for a moment and turned back. For the first time since he confessed, he looked uncertain. But by then, it was too late. The door closed behind them, and the sound of the police car driving away echoed through the quiet street. I stood alone in the hallway for a long time. The house felt silent again, just like it had after Robert passed away. Except this silence carried a different kind of pain. Because sometimes the hardest lesson in life isn't losing money. It's realizing that the person you trusted the most was willing to betray you. The house was quiet again. Not the peaceful kind of quiet I used to know, but the kind that follows after something breaks. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, the same chair where Robert used to sit every evening with his cup of tea. The sun was slowly setting, casting long shadows across the living room. For years, this house had been full of memories: birthday parties, Christmas mornings, the sound of Daniel's laughter when he was a little boy running through the hallway. Those memories still lived in these walls, but now they felt different. A few days later, the bank called to tell me that most of the stolen money had been frozen in Daniel's account before he could spend it. It would take time and paperwork, but they believed the majority of it would be returned. I should have felt relieved. But the truth was, the money had never been the hardest part. The hardest part was accepting that my own son had been willing to take advantage of me. Friends and neighbors eventually heard about what happened. Some of them came by to check on me, bringing food or offering kind words. One of my neighbors, Mrs. Carter, sat with me one afternoon in the kitchen. "I don't know how you're so strong," she said gently. I thought about her words for a moment. Then I shook my head. "I'm not strong," I told her. "I'm just a mother." Because no matter what Daniel had done, some part of my heart would always remember the little boy he used to be, the one who held my hand when crossing the street, the one who used to say, "Mom, you're my hero." But life has a way of changing people, and sometimes the people we love the most make the choices that hurt us the deepest. Still, I knew something important. Even after everything that had happened in my story wasn't over yet. Several months passed after that day. Slowly, life began to return to its quiet rhythm. The bank kept their promise, and most of the money was eventually returned to my account. It took paperwork, meetings, and more patience than I ever thought I had. But in the end, the savings Robert and I had worked for our whole lives were safe again. But something inside me had changed. I spent many evenings sitting on the porch, watching the sunset the way Robert and I used to. The sky would turn shades of orange and pink, and the cool evening breeze would move gently through the trees. Those quiet moments gave me time to think about life, about trust, and about the strange ways people sometimes lose their way. Daniel's case eventually went to court. The judge listened to everything: the bank records, the investigation, and Daniel's own confession. In the end, the law held him responsible for what he had done. It wasn't the outcome any mother hopes to see for her child, but sometimes the hardest lessons in life are the ones we must face. One afternoon, as I was watering the flowers in the garden Robert planted years ago, I realized something important. Pain can change you, but it doesn't have to destroy you. Someone once did something terrible to me. They believed I was too old, too weak, too trusting to fight back. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that a lifetime of experience teaches you more than people realize. And they didn't know that the truth always has a way of finding its way to the surface. Life had given me a painful chapter, but it also reminded me of something powerful. No matter what happens, kindness, honesty, and truth will always be stronger than betrayal. And that is a lesson worth remembering for the rest of my life.